Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and drag my screen over here, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oksana, can you do me a favor and just make sure we can go ahead and see this here?
Yes. Yeah, we can.
Cool. All good. Great. So, again, I wanted to say thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you, Oksana, and thank you to President Nuno Fernandez, as well as Ed Albin and the American Public University System for putting together this year's CIS conference. I was fortunate enough last year to present my paper on the physiological aspects and considerations of prolonged space travel. And now I would like to expound on the new space race that we find ourselves in as a species, why such a race is even on, and some potential political and legal ramifications that we may need to be on the lookout for. And I also speak briefly on how commercialization fits into this period. Now, with this presentation, I'm kind of hoping to help clarify some of the reasons space exploration is not only an interesting and enlightening endeavor, but also one of necessity for any civilized nation. So basically, what we have here is when the Soviet Union and the United States were amid the Cold War, much of the technology and exploration at the time was utilized to demonstrate militaristic superiority. That should come as no surprise. And it was not until the successful launch of Apollo 11 and landing on the moon that the world truly welcomed in a new age of space exploration, discovery, and challenge. But it also ended the space race, relieving just a small portion of the tension that had gathered through the century of exhausted nations. Before Apollo missions would explore the lunar surface over time, but then the United States realized that the Soviet Union basically was not ready to go to the moon, and the United States stopped going, and the Apollo missions kind of became, well, remnants of the past. Um, Now, there were other missions that attempted to reinvigorate the excitement and interest in space travel, exploration, and commercialization, and these included Skylab, the shuttle program, and the International Space Station, or the ISS. The ISS would become a beacon of cooperation and peaceful outer space collaboration, encompassing the rules, guidelines, and the spirit of space policy and law. The ISS was also the result of a collaboration and cooperation between several nations, including the United States, Russia, Canada, Japan, and other countries involved with the European Space Agency. Now, in January of 2019, China became the first nation to successfully land a robotic rover on the far side of the moon. And that marked an unprecedented leap forward for not only the Chinese space program, but humanity in general. And just a few years later, on November 16th, 2022, NASA successfully launched the Artemis 1 mission, signaling the beginning of a years long endeavor to return American astronauts to the moon. Although the craft was uncrewed, it represented a mission kind of like those developed in the Mercury and Gemini eras during the Cold War. And then in August of 2023, Russia tried to plant a lunar lander on the regolith, which ended in a crash. And around the same time, India successfully landed their rover on the south pole of the moon. In March of 2024, China and Russia announced their collaboration on the development of a nuclear power plant, which you kind of see a rendering of here. And that would basically be on the surface of the moon. And that would begin construction in 2033 and last approximately to 2035. Now, this would come on the heels of the International Lunar Research Station, or the ILRS, and that was announced in 2021 as a joint project between the two nations, and which the nuclear power plant would act as something of a battery for. And since 2017, the United States has generated a wealth of discussion and research surrounding its Lunar Gateway, which is a project that would bring 4 astronauts to the moon to operate a lunar space station. This endeavor comes as a collaboration between the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Europe, Canada, and Japan. Artemis 2 would be the next step in this move to the moon, with a human crew testing the craft, the flight around the moon, followed by Artemis 3 landing on the South Pole, and finally Artemis 4, which would see the development of systems necessary for long term lunar exploration. So, with these things in mind, there's two issues that it might be prudent to shed light on upon the new age of space exploration and responsible preparation in the 21st century. And I have them right here. They're commercialization and preservation, more specifically, space preservation. Now, although the other issues are not to be diminished by any means, the issues of commercialization and preservation are particularly troubling and complicated. And much of this is because of the nature of human beings and the manner in which space exploration and travel began. Now, the current world that continuously changes at an increasingly rapid rate is also a reason, as well as the plethora of objects that are currently in orbit or on other bodies of the solar system, with more constantly being added. Now, due to this fact, if space travel is to be a realm in which all can explore, the policies created by the United Nations decades ago can also be realized through this. Well, we need to solve certain problems. They need to be addressed, and preparations for solutions need to be formulated. Now, space holds the keys to answers about the origins of life, patterns of nature, and the diversity that lies within the act of simply existing. The knowledge we could gain from space exploration would carry profound effects to humanity, as it has before. As our society moves forward to space exploration, it's important to respect and understand exactly what can be found through human expansion into space. So, despite its hardships, obviously, proper preparation for an exploration and formulation of a strong worldwide space program will influence the better of humanity. But before we get into all of that, real quick, let's just touch real quick on what is out there and why explore it. So, obviously, first we have reasons such as sort of why we would invest in such a thing. Well, it's no secret that currently humanity has been seeking a new means of resources for continued survival and sustainability. So, for many years, China has actually been responsible for refining almost about 90% of rare earth metals. These rare earth metals are vital for technologies that are used in most industries, including health and pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, smartphones, and computers. They're just a few everyday resources that are used for the increasing living standards of the modern world. But within the next 15 to 20 years, it's projected and indicating that that resource from China will actually be depleted, and humans will need to look elsewhere for modern electronics production. So, understanding that these materials are being depleted and educating the public on why this is happening and informing them that there is actually another way to continue their use is important if humans are to have any hope of progressing as a cohesive entity without self annihilation. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. We start talking about helium-3. So in 1985, a group of scientists realized that the lunar regolith has been bombarded with solar radiation, and this is due to its lack of a magnetic field. Within these solar winds, there are now within the lunar soil, there lies helium-3, and it's extraordinarily valuable due to its potential ability to act as a fusion fuel source. Now, it is found not only in the lunar surface, but also in the atmosphere of different moons and planets. Unfortunately, humanity currently does not have the technology necessary to harness the power helium-3 provides, but that's not necessarily a scientific reason. It's not, oh, I'm sorry, rather, it's not necessarily a scientific reason that this element is not being used to its full potential. It's actually more of a budgetary one. The fusion reactors that would be required to adequately utilize the energy potential of helium-3, it's not necessarily a priority for policymakers controlling scientific research and projects in Washington, D.C. Fusion programs thrived in the 1960s through international competition. But in the 90s, the national fusion programs were consolidated, and therefore the incentive to create the reactors sort of evaporated with that. Understanding helium-3 and how it can be used could provide humanity not only with ways of harnessing it, but other elements as well, and could lead to a power and resource revolution, which is why the moon has become a bed of attention and exploration, especially with the premise of mining for precious resources that the Earth will be desperate for soon. Speaking of mining, so asteroid mining is quickly becoming another potential avenue for future exploration, mining, and exploitation. It sounds far away, but it's actually not. Near-Earth asteroids hold metal and elemental reserves that can contribute to energy consumption. Asteroid mining could also contribute to the affordability and accessibility of precious minerals and resources. They could contribute to sustainability practices and energy formulation, and outsource potentially climate harming mining practices to locations outside of Earth. An example of such mining and resource potential can be stated with the solid metal asteroid 16 Psyche, and that's kind of the artist's rendering I have here. NASA has begun a campaign to travel to this asteroid, but they do it strictly for scientific exploration as opposed to resource extraction. NASA will utilize a SpaceX rocket. It's projected to meet the asteroid between Mars and Jupiter in 2029. At which time it'll orbit the 167-mile wide asteroid for about 26 months, it's almost about 2 years, photographing, mapping, and scanning the asteroid to study its mineral composition and structure. Exploration of the cosmos is the next logical step in the scientific progression of humanity. With the knowledge that can be gained from exploration of the solar system and cosmos, as well as the potential wealth of resources among celestial bodies, the need for comprehensive programs for resources and scientific research will become more prevalent. Although humans cannot agree on the issues that are currently plaguing the society and the planet, it is important to find common ground in what type of civilization we could be if we chose to expand our horizons. However, this expansion does not come without its share of potential problems, which is what I get into now. So as I previously stated, you see this asteroid right here. So that is the 16th Psyche, and as I said, United States, they're currently running a campaign to intercept it for 2029. Now, despite this decision being made for scientific purposes, uh, there's one major question that should be considered, which falls in line with the idea of preparation that is currently being explored by the scientific community. But this is more of a legal and political consideration. This question involves ownership of the asteroid, should NASA or SpaceX seek to stake claim. Now, although the potential for asteroid mining could contribute trillions of dollars to the global economy, disputes would inevitably emerge and the international stage on the international stage, and should one nation gain control over asteroid mining technologies or lay claim to one valuable asteroid, hoarding the bounty the asteroid brings for the insular benefit of that one nation. The asteroid 16 Psyche, it actually contains about $10 quintillion in current money of valuable metals, such as gold. To put that in perspective, such a sum of money would be enough to supply every human being on the planet with $93 billion. Now, this might sound ideal in the short term. I mean, it would kind of be foolish to turn away from $93 billion when it's offered to you, except perhaps if it's being offered out of the back of a van that kind of looks like this. Um, Although I don't know, I'd probably still try to take it. Anyway, offering every human being on earth the sum of money and dragging the destitute out of poverty, thereby potentially ushering in a new age of prosperity for humanity, seems like a logical conclusion to this scenario. However, it would also, and more likely than not, destabilize the market and financial world by collapsing the gold market. The other issue here is that if there's more than one valuable asteroid out there, which there is, if one nation or an alliance of nations were to take control of, say, asteroid 16 Psyche, another nation or a union of nations could gain control of this little guy, Davida, an asteroid with a net worth of $27 quintillion. Now, additionally, if one nation were to take control of both asteroids, the international dispute would basically be imminent. Now, the Outer Space Treaty states that space is to be for the benefit of all humanity. But if only a few solitary players can achieve the technological feats required to explore the domain, and the concept of open exploration for all of humanity, it basically dies, especially if you can form a monopoly over such things as asteroid mining. Although space travel for all is not immediately feasible due to current technology, it is expected that such possibilities will become reality in the future. This is not something to take lightly or procrastinate developing solutions to. So, this concept proves to be difficult because, on one hand, if humanity is to seek external factors for resource utilization, they will also need the right to extract those resources and exploit them for consumption. However, if space is to be a domain for all, no nation can really own anything. So this brings up a reality that humans would first need to kind of contend with before moving forward with many of this. One of the many reasons that space exploration is such a contentious issue, politically and legally, is because of the inherent competitive nature in not only the United States, but in human beings in general. If there remains no incentive to achieve a greater understanding or high ground of any over any, another entity or nation, there could be no impetus to move forward in any direction. So soon after the space race was won, the funding of NASA programs was diminished down significantly to 1%. By 1975. And then once the United States saw that the Soviet Union wasn't going to the moon anymore, the United States pulled the space exploration mission parameters back to Earth. And we kind of remained in low Earth orbit for decades. We continued to dwindle in the budget, which it had, down to the 0.5% that it is today. Chinese expansion in space carries with it the promises of landing taikonauts on the lunar surface in the coming years. And this has sparked the US interest in expanding into the solar system, among other things, but it's a major factor. Now, that's an unfortunate reality, and as history has shown, the competitive nature of humans and tribes drives innovation in an upward direction, but it does it quickly. Now, the only way to experience the full potential of the exploration, commercialization, and preservation of the space environment, we have to find a way to formulate new relationships and methods of cooperation stringently and meticulously between nations. Now, this is where leadership kind of comes in. Despite the compelling speeches and spectacles of presidential or vice presidential or governmental rhetoric, there remains to this day a very low level of coherent or comprehensive vision for a space policy or exploration. There have been dabblements here and there, but a lot of this is due to the interest of national leadership. It also is the interest limits that such leadership has, or how much Washington is willing to put into the program over other programs and opportunities. There's also a dependence on the coherence of the policy that's being utilized or suggested, the policy itself, and the power that the president has to make that policy work. Another part of this is the fact that the public tends to lose interest in the space program because they don't tend to see the connections with the issues that are faced in the country right now on the planet with the space program itself. Um, Perhaps it would be naive to say that the curious nature of humans and the drive to exploration will be enough to keep the lights on. But the bottom line must be developed, and with incentive formulated, and the bottom line needs to be developed. We have to have incentives formulated for potential stakeholders. Interest isn't going to be enough. Curiosity is not going to be enough. Further exploration will require a total vision, merging exploratory and more technically useful practices and models. So, this is another consideration that I think we really need to think about. It's not simply the moon and other celestial bodies that are targets of criticism and uncertainty, right? Such issues within the orbit of the Earth have been causes for concern and sincere consideration. And again, this is the exorbitant presence of space debris currently rocketing around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. Now, space debris comes in the form of many objects, from defunct satellites to obsolete second stages to discarded paint chips and the shattered remains of destroyed vessels. According to the European Space Agency, the current space debris orbiting the Earth has reached millions. Any one of these objects can cause catastrophic damage to any kind of spacecraft, including global positioning satellites, weather and climate monitoring satellites, or the International Space Station, putting the lives of astronauts at risk in real time. Hardware and incomplete pieces of rocket stages litter low Earth orbit in the hundreds of thousands, circling the Earth at enormous speeds and potentially causing immense harm to not only other functioning and essential hardware, but as I said, it's the astronauts. This creates a Kessler syndrome. Now, the Kessler syndrome is a phenomenon in which space junk that drifts through orbit causes damage to other pieces of hardware, thereby ripping them apart and causing more space debris, and making satellite observations and astronaut missions in orbit or beyond more difficult, tumultuous, and potentially impossible. Now, the Registration Convention Treaty of 1975 contains requirements for sending an object into space, mostly serving to minimize the likelihood of weapons in space, but also to identify crafts that are doing damage. The Liability Convention is a method of holding nations responsible for what they put into space and the potential or actual damage that it can cause. Now, unfortunately, neither of these treaties actually hold any serious or dependable consequences for violations of these rules. Now, something's got to change here. Human nature, again, is linked to exploration, but it can also be linked to destruction if we're not careful. In 2021, more than 27,000 pieces of orbital debris were tracked by the Department of Defense. Now, although debris is not all human made, it makes up a substantial portion of the debris currently in orbit through second stages, defunct satellites, or dismantled paint chips broken off during atmospheric reentry. If humanity is to reach beyond the confines of Earth and explore other bodies to meet energy or resource demands, space debris and its mitigation will need considerable solutions. It's important that this problem be solved as quickly and as carefully as possible, though, too. Because if an attempt to destabilize a piece of junk in orbit has negative consequences or fails, it could create even more debris. This is something that kind of happened with China in 2007 when they performed an anti-satellite test. It just destroyed a piece of a satellite, but it also rocketed other pieces of it all throughout the orbit. Now, there have been efforts by other nations to build craft that can remove space junk in a quick and sufficient manner. It's kind of got an artist rendering of that down here. And these solutions really should be actualized. Several methods of space debris, they've already been developed, and this is a space junk collector. You can utilize robotic arms or connector services, a balloon system that can change its level of deflation and drag junk out of orbit, fishnet systems that react against the magnetic field of the Earth, and deorbiting systems that operate on chemical propulsion. Japan has actually even begun plans, and they've been using trying to use lasers to eliminate the junk itself. But much of this has been met with scrutiny, since again, it may break apart the larger objects and create countless smaller ones, and that contributes to the Kessler syndrome quite a bit. Now, solutions to this problem, they're plentiful, but they need to be properly funded and combated with the melding of the correct minds and technologies. Now, a solution to the problem of preservation of spaces outside of budget, formulating a task force just specifically designated to handle the space debris problem. Now, a branch of the United States Space Force that could be sufficient, allowing different members of different nations to operate together to solve that problem. It could also be a way to to play into the competitive nature of humans. The successful retrieval of a space junk object by a nation could mean that the nation that retrieved it gets to keep the hardware for future use or retooling. But that's another kind of contentious issue. It could create a problem based on the registration convention. But perhaps it might be prudent to update the branches of the OST for current missions and concerns. The above mentioned topics are, they're just a few concerns plaguing the current space exploration industry. But there is one other small note to be made here. Now, as resources become scarce, radical ideas and potentially oppressive governmental regulations can take hold and choke the ambition and aspirations out of a society of people. Resources are defined by human creativity and ingenuity. Raw materials become resources based on how they are utilized by humans. So, give you an example, right? Petroleum. It was not always a resource, meaning it was not always that useful. It was human ingenuity, skill, and knowledge that made petroleum the resource that it is today. The ability to turn a resource into an energy source is a talent relegated to humans. So resources don't come from Earth necessarily, and they don't even really come from space. They come from people who are resourceful. So, with a strong space program, perhaps humanity can put the talents of resourceful people into action, granting them credence to explore creative solutions to energy problems and sustenance issues. And this is why the issues above should be considered, and a robust space program that almost involves all nations must be prepared for and fostered in any civilized society. So, real quick, I just want to touch on commercialization and adaptation and solutions. The commercialization of space basically involves any activity performed by private sector companies instead of governmental ones. Obviously, commercialization and economics will overlap and affect each other in various ways. As private companies begin to invest and produce opportunities for exploration, the disruption of the governmental market structure becomes warped. Now, this can't be said to be necessarily a bad thing. It's perhaps something that the government has done intentionally to drive forward innovation and drive down costs by expanding the commercial space company role. Historically, most of the budget for NASA went to private contractors to design and manufacture rockets and spacecraft. NASA would basically maintain oversight and obviously operate the equipment. In the new age of space commercialization, NASA not only uses contractors, but as we've seen, they use private companies as well. And this can pull down costs for low Earth orbit and trips to the ISS, which we're seeing, which it used to cost much more money when the US was utilizing the Russian Soyuz craft for its orbital flights. Using private companies for rocket and hardware construction, NASA could focus more on scientific missions and exploration and exploring new frontiers, developing safety mission success plans that could assist in driving missions, and project turnaround rates at a quicker pace. Space is still perceived as a growth opportunity by most, if not all, nations and corporations. Entrepreneurs see space as a viable commercial entity and believe civilians outside of the commercial and governmental space sector would be able to traverse low Earth orbit with regular tours for paying customers, which we're seeing. We've been seeing the infancy stages of this with Virgin Galactic, the Polaris Dawn SpaceX that just happened, Blue Origin trips where they shot Shatner up there. The most recent was that Polaris Dawn. It's really something. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. But Elon Musk and SpaceX are also still formulating plans for an eventual Mars mission, with several attempts to launch and land the 100-seat Starship, with a fifth attempt coming soon. Since commercialization is something that cannot be easily solved through governmental regulation, it could be in the best interest of the nation to allow the free market to dictate exactly how to move forward with space exploration. Airplanes used to be only for a select group of civilians with the money to afford the tickets, right? The same was for credit cards and for boat trips across the ocean. And now access to these modern day conveniences is so plentiful, where they're almost forgotten or taken for granted. So the initial stages of this evolution can be seen in the current space programs and opportunities that private industry is providing for these wealthy individuals. So as space becomes more commercialized arena for independent companies, such companies will be increasingly responsible for spacecraft tools, pilots, and scientists that can leave a monopoly on private space exploration open, since many commercial space companies are on US soil. So this is a situation in which the vague nature of international space policy and the flexible interpretation of the rules and regulations of the policy are on full display. So if a private entity such as SpaceX, Blue Origin, or Virgin Galactic were to violate any of the rules of the Outer Space Treaty, one would think there would be ample consequences. There kind of are, but not necessarily. There's a disconnect between private organizations and the government sector. It's because at the time of its inception, the OST was designed for scientific purposes only, using scientific breakthroughs as capital in the space age, as opposed to resource garnishments. This basically means that private organizations consider anything that is not prohibited by the OST legal, even though one would not need to be particularly versed in geopolitics and capitalism to consider the slippery slope in which that line of thinking kind of rests. Um, Such a mindset would allow commercial organizations a doorway into rapid expansion into the space industry, which was once monopolized by governmental organizations and nation states following the language and policies of the OST. Um, so, lastly, I just want to briefly touch on just kind of moving forward throughout history. There appears to be a trend among technologically advancing civilizations to reach increasingly grandiose ambitions. This can be seen through the advent of agriculture, transforming human beings from wandering nomads into communal settlers, the invention of the transistor, allowing electricity to flow through communities, the splitting of the atom, leading to a bomb that would spark endless controversy, but at the time promised potentially ending a war, and the internet, formulating a global telephone network. In short, as technology advances, bigger missions and grander endeavors become inevitable. However, bigger sometimes is not always better. Missions can shift with the climate and the popular zeitgeist, depending upon the technology of the time and the
Sorry, Daniel,
direction in which,
I'm going
yes.
to interrupt you for a second. We have 4 more minutes, so if anybody has any questions,
Oh.
please type them in chat or Q&A, and you can, I guess, finish up while we are waiting for questions. But we have 3 more minutes at this point.
No, that's great. I lost track of time and I literally was on the last paragraph. So I really thank you. Yeah, I got a little carried away. I'm going to stop my screen share here.
Well, thank you everybody for joining, and thank you, Daniel, for a wonderful presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care.
Sessions throughout the day, so everybody can go to different rooms and join our next sessions. Bye
Have a
bye.
good day. Thank you.